15 miles per hour. You wish you could drive faster down the blackened back road, but you can hardly see further than a few meters in front of your car. This trail is peppered with incongruent rocks and dips. Driving any faster could spell disaster for you and your vehicle. But it's so tempting to lay on the gas as the bizarre calls bellow behind you. Even with your windows rolled up, the sounds reverberate throughout the cab. It's getting closer. Suddenly, another sound erupts from in front of you, a familiar and most dreadful noise. The fading wails of your engine as the car slows to a halt. You can do nothing but wait, as in only seconds, a nightmarish face appears behind the driver's side window. These are 5 allegedly true and horrifying night drive stories. If you have a story of your own, share it with us at darknessprevails.org for a chance to have it narrated on the show. What did we hear? From Zipple. Location: Michigan. I'm a 19-year-old girl located in Michigan. I've always been interested in the paranormal, and so is my best friend. We can call her Hunter. Hunter and I are both night shift workers who tend to work opposite days. When we do get the chance to see each other, it usually involves late-night drives listening to spooky stories. This particular occurrence happened just last week while we were out on one of these drives. Hunter was looking for a place to buy, so we were often checking out houses. This doesn't seem important now, but it will be later. I had spent a couple of bucks to buy an Ovilus app on my phone. If you're not sure what that is, an Ovilus is supposed to allow you to communicate with spirits. You're meant to ask it questions and receive one-word answers back. If you watch Ghost Adventures, they often use one. When I told Hunter about it, she immediately agreed that it'd be fun to take a trip to one of the local cemeteries. Now, both of us are chickens, despite our curiosity, so we agreed to stay in the car. It was supposed to be some fun, just a joke. I was not expecting what happened. It was just after 3 a.m. when we pulled into the cemetery. This one was between a small town and a 10-mile road. Once again, doesn't seem important, but it will be. Now we pull in only a few feet, trying to decide whether or not we would get stuck in the snow that was on the ground. But it was plowed enough that she'd be able to get through with her SUV. With nervous excitement, we pulled further into the creepy cemetery. I kicked on the app, and we started asking questions, but nothing super surprising or cool came up on the app. I suggested we pull in further, since it circled back to the road anyway. We were only going about 5 miles per hour. The Ovilus app doesn't come up with anything when we're moving. Surrounding the back circle of these trails are woods. They go back pretty far, and we're at the absolute back part when Hunter starts speeding up. It was almost too much for the slick little trail. "What are you doing?" I asked, eyeballing her. She looked at me almost fearful. I'm not going to stop next to the woods. I let it go with a shrug and pointed out when we were in front of an open field again. We were maybe 10 feet from the road at this point. The Ovilus app kicks back into gear, spewing out random words in this order: come, line, threat, fear. Hunter decided that was enough and peeled out of the cemetery. We were laughing at each other and decided to go see one of the houses that she was interested in. She turns on her GPS. It says the house is about 16 minutes away. She said that couldn't be right, as that house was right in town, maybe just a 2-minute drive from the cemetery. Nevertheless, we followed the directions. When we got to the center of the little town, we turned right onto an 11-mile road. About 2 miles down the road, we turn right again, finding ourselves smack dab in the woods and out away from the streetlights of the city. There were very few houses, and there were lots of little off-trails leading into the woods. Hunter had the heat going, and I got too hot, so I rolled down my window a few inches. We drive as the GPS tells us to go down the 10-mile road. What? Again, that couldn't be right. We were coming up on the turn, but there wasn't a road. Hunter slows the vehicle a little, and we're looking, but there's nothing. No road signs, no noticeable tire tracks, hardly a road at all. That's when we said nope, and just kept on driving. We were discussing how bizarre this was, when I heard something in the woods. It was a low-pitched howl mixed with a sort of moan. I asked Hunter if she heard it, and she hadn't. Lucky her. I was too embarrassed to explain what I'd actually heard, so I brushed it off as nothing. Maybe it was just the car making a weird noise. When we got off of that road, the GPS recalibrated and showed us where the house really was. Right in town, 2 minutes from the cemetery, like Hunter had said before. I was frowning at the phone when suddenly Hunter cursed. I did the same as well, staring at her incredulously. There had been a deer staring at her head on and in the dark, and she had just made it out in time to jump. As we were making our way to our original destination, I decided to tell her what I'd heard back in those woods. She stared at me with wide eyes. She admitted that when we were in the cemetery by the woods, she had heard the same kind of noise, except it was more of a growl. Her window had been up the entire time. So, what followed us out of the cemetery? What was growling at us? What would travel so many miles? And was it the same thing that messed up our GPS? I can't help but feel that something was trying to keep us in those woods, lure us into a very terrifying demise. A normal person would never go back, but being the two of us, we're discussing our next trip. Maybe we'll go during the day, though. The Green Laser, from Coral L. Location, Northern California. So, over the summer, I ended up moving from the hometown that I spent 10 years in. Something I realized that I'd never done but really wanted to do was go for a night drive. So I gathered up some friends, Maddie, Morgan, and Amelia, and went for a drive in my truck. Now, I lived in a small prison town in Northern California, so the town was easy to navigate and was never very busy at night. We drove around for a while, just exploring. It was all fun until we decided to go up to Inspiration Point. You see, Inspiration Point is a cute little spot uptown where people can go and look over the town. You could see everything up there. It was especially pretty at night with all of the lights. So we were just hanging out up there when I saw something flash in my eyes. At first, I thought it was a bug, so I brushed it off as nothing. But then it kept flashing quickly over my eyes. Then Maddie pointed it out. There was a green laser that kept pointing at us from below. We all looked over the edge of the cliff to try to find the source of the strange beam, and it was coming from a house right below us. Even in the dark, we could see almost everything that was happening at that house. There was a man down there in his front yard, holding something up to his eye, which happened to be the source of the green laser. He's got a scope, Morgan pointed out. Once she had said it, we all saw it. He's probably just looking to see what's going on up here, Amelia suggested. We were being a bit loud. Yeah, but he must be used to it, right? I mean, teenagers come up here to drink and smoke all the time. We're probably not nearly as loud as other people, I said. Maybe he's a cop and he's making sure that we're not doing anything bad, Maddie tried to reassure us. We all nodded. but we were still kind of scared by the laser. After watching him for a while, he put the scope down and got into his car. Morgan, being the paranoid one, started to freak out. "He's coming in our direction, guys. We need to leave," she said. Now, I loved listening to scary stories, so a ton of different scenarios were going through my head as to what would happen to us. I quickly agreed that we needed to leave. We walked as fast as we could back down to my truck and got in. But as I was driving, trying to stay calm, I saw another car coming up the road that led to Inspiration Point. This other vehicle pulled over to the side because the street was too narrow for 2 cars at the time. As I drove closer to the car, the other girls were freaking out, saying, "That's the guy, and it's the same car." I was scared and looked out my window as we passed. Time seemed to slow down as my heart raced, and the car was a man in his 60s, and he was grinning the creepiest grin I'd ever seen. In his passenger seat, I'll never forget it, I saw rope, tape, and something metal and sharp glinting in the pale light. I hit the gas pedal so hard that my friends didn't get a chance to look inside the vehicle. I drove around, driving as fast as I could and taking every back road I could find to lose him. After 10 minutes of speeding around, scared, we finally felt like we were no longer being followed. We then decided that that was enough adventure for the night. Looking back on it, I'm glad I got out of that town sooner rather than later. I do not know what that guy's intentions were or what the metal object was that he had under the rope, but I'm glad we never found out. The drive that I regret, from Mr. Ghost 56. Location, Utah. One night, my family and I were going on a quick drive near Dixie Rock. I always thought it was a peaceful and beautiful place, a good spot to let your stress go away. But that changed after this one night. I was 10 years old back then. I was a paranoid kid, I'll admit it, but you'll soon see that this situation was different. We had some blankets in the car just in case we fell asleep on the way there. My siblings did fall asleep, but I managed to stay awake. About 10 minutes after we arrived and we were still driving around, the most horrific scream echoed outside the vehicle. It sounded like someone brutally attacking another person, or maybe some animals fighting to the end. It sent chills down my spine. My mom and my brother heard the scream through the windows as well. They said that it sounded like a child screaming in pain, then slowly shifting to a laugh. Of course, around that time, we decided to cut the trip short, so we began to head back home. After my mother puts the car in park back in the driveway at our house, I was staring into the backyard, just resting my head, when I saw something. The backyard was where I always take my dogs for a walk, and considering this, I think that's why it scared me even more, to know that my backyard will never feel safe again. There was a face blacker than the night, with contrasting paper white eyes. It seemed to think it was hiding, but I could see it, and it was watching our car. I quickly grabbed my mom and tried to point out the face, but when we looked back, it was gone. Yet I knew that thing was still there. I quickly grabbed the dogs, confident that they would protect me. Then we walked into the backyard. When I was out there, I could hear something breathing, but I couldn't pinpoint where. I could tell my dogs could hear it too, but they were cowering rather than being curious. After a few minutes, we rushed back into the house and locked the door behind us. Because of the weird events that happened that night, I stayed up on my tablet. I had tried to sleep for an hour or two, but I couldn't. I was too creeped out. As I was sitting there playing on my tablet, I heard the most disturbing knock. It wasn't at the door, but it was at the window in my room. I remember thinking, how would it know what room I was in? I waited maybe 30 minutes, hoping that it was nothing, hoping that if it was something, it would just go away. But it knocked again, basically forcing me up to see what was outside. I made only enough room in the curtain to poke my eye through, and I nearly fell back and screamed when I saw that extremely black face and extremely white eyes. It had 4 even darker fingers on the glass, like little voids of nothingness. Slowly, I lowered the curtain and I crawled back in bed, watching the window for the rest of the night. From then on out, I promised myself, if I ever hear another knock at the window like that again, I'm not going to investigate. And as often as possible, I try to get someone else to walk the dogs outside in the backyard. I'm too scared, and I can't even tell anyone why, because of how ridiculous it sounds. Mom and Dad, something followed us home during our night drive at Dixie Rock. I don't know what to do. Maybe it'll just go away. It's looking at me. From McMahon. Location, Oregon. I live in Oregon, and I love road trips. But after this experience, I'll never go on a road trip again. It was 2014. I was hanging out with 2 of my friends. They were Connor and Brian. It was early December, so we were all dressed quite warm and cozy. Now, before I start this story, the place where I live has loads of deer, foxes, and other animals that roam around. Nothing that was about to happen to me and my friends was created by one of these small animals, though. I was 15, and they say that teenagers think that they're invincible. But back then, I felt much the opposite of that. When we all got in the car that night with my parents, who had to drive us at the time, we were all pretty exhausted by then, considering it was 2 a.m., and it was still pitch black out and we had a long drive ahead of us. So we were all gathered in the back of the car, trying to get some rest. We were about 30 miles from the hotel we were going to stay at for the night. We were driving a 2018 BMW X6, so the car has automatic braking and cruise control. Now this becomes annoying when you don't want to stop and your car just stops. We were 5 miles from the hotel and all of a sudden the car stops, like it senses something. It turned out to be a squirrel, I think, that just wandered across the road. An eerily creepy road, which wasn't a good sign. As we approached a very small hotel, it seemed as though nobody was there, just completely vacant. We stayed in separate rooms, so my mom didn't really care if we stayed up late in ours, as that meant they would be able to get some sleep no matter what we did. We just had to be up and ready for the long ride we still had ahead of us in the morning. Connor decided to go to bed anyway, so that left me and Brian to find something to do. So we decided to go have a late night swim, or early morning swim. As we headed out to get into the pool, I didn't feel it at first, but eventually I had this sensation that we weren't alone. I looked down into the pool, and there was a creature that looked like something straight from a nightmare. Now listen, I didn't believe in cryptids or horrific creatures like this, but immediately, in that moment, I was convinced. I looked over at Brian. "Tell me you're seeing that," I whispered in a barely audible voice. "See what?" Brian said before he got cut off by the most ear-aching screech. When I looked back at the creature, it was looking directly back at me with these orange eyes. I didn't see Brian when I was frantically looking for him. In a panic, I looked back at the creature. I couldn't look away too long out of fear that it might do something. It was still staring me down. I looked behind me, and that's where Brian was, hiding behind me the entire time. I looked back in the direction of that creature. It wasn't in the water anymore. It wasn't anywhere. It was gone. As fast as we had seen it, it had escaped, leaving a wake of ripples in the pool. We returned to our side of the complex and decided soon after to go over and tell my parents about what we experienced. We were at the door when we heard the most terrifying scream ever. Brian and I ran back to our side, and in our living room area, at the window, there it was, completely flipping out Connor and waking my parents, who came running in, but they were too late, as whatever that thing was quickly ran away again. Brian's mouth was agape like a drawbridge. Brian ran, probably to find someone, anyone who could help, and I was left disturbed and confused. I have no idea what we saw that night, and thankfully, I doubt we'll ever see anything like it again. My road trip horror story. From RisaNicola. Location, Michigan. One summer, I think I was 19 or 20 years old, my dad and I decided to go on a road trip together in my Firebird, which was the same engine and speed as the Trans Am the year the car was made, 1989. My dad and I share a love of muscle cars, and my dad really wanted to get it out to the open road to see what it could do. Even though we both had different reasons for going on the trip, or rather different destinations. We were going up to Michigan so my dad could visit with our extended family, and in turn, to entice me more to go on the trip with him, he made me a deal. We could hop on over to Chicago from there, where my boyfriend at the time lived. I lived in Virginia, so any chance to see my boyfriend, I was all over it. But it would be the night that my heart basically jumped into my throat and my stomach felt like it fell right out of my body. We were on the last stretch of the 20 to 25 miles in Michigan before we reached my dad's mom's place. I was driving that last stretch of road. I'm a night owl. Arguably, it's probably when I'm most awake, thanks to my schedule. My dad was asleep in the passenger seat. We were going down a very dark country road. I think I was going about 60 miles per hour. As I was coming over a slight hill just from the corner of my eye, I caught the image of a person with wild hair, which I swear looked like the clown from It, just going from the silhouette. This person was crouched on the side of the road, and as she saw my car, she darted out in front of it. In a panic, I had to slam on my brakes so hard, my dad was jolted awake and thought that I had been carelessly driving and nearly wrecked. I only barely avoided hitting what I could now see was a woman with a bewildered look on her face, with no seeming concern for the fact that I nearly flattened her. I thought maybe she was hurt or needed help and desperate. I lowered the window just enough to hear her, as she looked possibly to be under the influence of something. I quickly asked her if she was hurt, or if she needed some police or ambulance help. My dad was coming around waking up and realized this woman had forced me to stop. She bizarrely begged me not to call 911, which made me feel uneasy, and then she seriously asked my dad and I to please help her get her car out of a ditch, because no one was supposed to know she had this car. It was really odd. My dad and I looked at each other for a moment. We couldn't believe what was going on. This wild, disheveled lady seriously crouched on the side of the road waiting for a car, then risked her life recklessly to jump out in front of it, all just to plead for help to get her supposed car out of a ditch, all within the pitch black of a random night, no streetlights or towns nearby. It was the strangest experience of my life driving on a road trip. My dad had me drive off as soon as she said she wanted help sneaking her car out of a ditch. I'm glad he was there because I had honestly froze. I was so confused and bewildered at her request. She had such blatant disregard for her own life. I was speechless. We had about 15 more minutes driving as we discussed what the heck happened, and I couldn't help but think of what truly her intention must have been. Neither me nor my dad really bought the story that she fed us. You don't just jump out like that if you're needing help to pull a car from a ditch. We generally came to the consensus that this lady, who I honestly believe was on some sort of substance or something, was ultimately trying to get us out of the car to carjack us or have a partner jump out and ambush us. The more I thought about it, the more eerie it all felt. I had worried about the next person she may stop, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do anything about it. I called the police when I arrived, but never heard what came of the situation. I couldn't sleep that whole night, and as soon as we arrived at the house, I felt my body start shaking, as the adrenaline was beginning to wear off from that encounter. I was exhausted, but my mind was running too wild with what-ifs to sleep that night. If you're driving on an old road at night, it's probably best not to stop for anyone, because you can't always trust people. A night drive is meant to be relaxing, but it's often the opposite, straight up horrifying. So be careful and never drive too slow. Give them even a single vulnerable moment, and any monster, ghoul, or psycho will take the opportunity to end your trip for good. Good night. If you like this episode, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you've got a story of your own, you can share it with us at darknessprevails.org/submit for a chance to have it narrated on the show. If you want to support us, you can go to patreon.com/darknessprevails or teespring.com/stores/darknessprevails to browse our merchandise, or simply click the shop button below if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video about 5 haunted schools. Ruby Trujillo says, schools are torture chambers. Maybe. The worst part I remember were the greasy fries that you could wring out like a rag. Yeah, that's what they fed us. Disgusting. Kelly Martin says, obligatory comment. Well, take this random lottery reply. You're welcome. Parvis Gaming asks, what's your favorite type of sauce? Usually ketchup, but if I'm feeling real spicy, I enjoy Popeye's cocktail sauce. Brandon Summerlin says, hey, I'm not late. Please give me the nightmare juice. Alright, Brandon. I'm just kidding. I know I'm disgusting. And Frozen Raichu says, my Algebra 2 average is 18 right now. That's scary. I don't know if you've got a different scoring system where you're at, but 18, that's impressive in a very bad way. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't be too scared, because more scary stories are on the way soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing and loyal patrons who continue to donate. Thank you all. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.